Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Grow Intentionally podcast. Today, I have my friend Jason Mefford. You might have heard us in a podcast episode that he interviewed me on a few weeks ago. Well, the tables are turned and he is in the spotlight today with his Rams hat, baseball cap on.
No, it's a little ironic, right?
I'm many hats.
Wearing a baseball cap for a baseball cap for a football team. That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, but it looks good. It's better than a helmet. So Jason seriously does own a lot of hats. You'll see him in many different hats along the way. And today, I want to introduce him as a business owner. He is also an executive coach. He does software sales, and he does training, as well as he calls himself as an edutainer, which is a funny way to say he entertains you with his education. He makes things simple so that you can have an easy time understanding processes. He's very techy, and he's able to explain things in a way that is easy for you to get. And so that's why he's an edutainer, and he is also a podcast host. So Jason, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I kind of jumped in there and stole a little bit of the thunder while you're trying to do the formal introduction. But hey, I'm a little different kind of a guy.
So. Yes, you are. You're so much fun. I had such a blast talking with you on your podcast, and it was just going rambling on and on and on and on. In fact, today, before we began this podcast, we were talking about so many different topics, and we decided that we'd like to speak about growth in general, because part of what Jason does is he does trainings and he teaches people things. And we were just happened to be talking about how, as employees, we are forced to learn sometimes things that we don't want to know, but we have so much hours a year that we need to be trained and educated. So we were just talking about how different it is to choose to grow in your life.
Yeah.
What do you want? I'm going to throw that at you right there. And take it.
Well, yeah. And because as you were talking, I mean, it's, again, everybody's going to kind of get my personality, but weird things just pop into my head. So as you were talking, about that, there's some recent Head and Shoulders commercials that are out where it's like Troy Polamalu and Patrick Mahomes, Head and Shoulders. And Troy shows up all the time and says, never not working, never not working. Never not working, right? So like Head and Shoulders is never not working. It's always keeping dandruff off of you, right? And as you were talking, I was thinking, as a person, I'm never not teaching and I'm never not learning as well, right? And that a lot of times I think, like you said, growth is something that's really important for us as human beings. We got to grow or we die. If you think about us like plants, I mean, we're a, bioorganism too, right? We've got to be growing just like plants have to be growing, or else we're dying, right? And a lot of that comes through learning and growing and developing ourselves. And so, like you said, so many people, especially a lot of the people that I've served in corporations, they get this very narrow view of what learning is, what training is, and corporate training honestly really sucks for the most part, right? It's like, hello, today we're going to talk about whatever, and on slide number 2, right? Bullet point number 3. I mean, you've been in those kind of trainings, right?
Yes.
That I think we've taught most people that learning isn't fun, when in fact, I mean, I think learning is one of the most fun things that we can actually do in life.
Yeah, I agree, because I also was in a corner in my life where someone offered me the opportunity to grow and take a personal development class. And that is what changed my life. And it's been 9 years of constant educating and learning more about myself. What are my values? What do I want? How can I achieve my goals? And if I wasn't given the direction to follow, I would not have gone down this path. I would have been, just so unhappy. And so thinking that there was nothing else really. So,
well, yeah, I was going to say, and when you, just like you had that experience, right? Once you kind of get that bug and it's like, ooh, this is cool, right? Instead of, because honestly, I mean, growing up and having to go to school, I didn't like to go to school. I love to learn. I didn't like going to school, right? And a lot of people, I think, kind of carry that over instead of realizing we learn outside of the classroom. In fact, one of the podcasts I did, I've got 2 different podcasts that actually go, and one of them, the Fire and Earth podcast we did, one of the episodes we called "You Learn More in the Bars Than the Classroom."
in college?
Well, in college, but also even as professionals, because what's funny is when you go to training, like I know you just got back from one.
Yes.
A lot of times the learning when you go to conferences or other things are not necessarily in the presentations or the formal education that you get, but it's afterwards, after the day is over, having drinks at the bar with some of the people that are there and just learning from them, or even learning from the people that were giving the formal presentations, but learning things in a different way because you're in that social relaxed setting where you can actually learn better anyway.
Exactly. And that's true. The training that I just came from was in an Airbnb. And so it was such a cozy atmosphere. It wasn't like a normal training in a cold, stuffy hotel room. And I really did enjoy it because if I was cold, I could go and grab my blanket and cuddle up on the chair and listen like you're at home watching a movie. And it was beautiful. And like you're saying, after the class is done and we're on break, we are all in the kitchen together, making lunch together. And that's when the questions came so easily and naturally, like to understand more. And so it was the best training setup I've ever been in. I also was in the training department when I was in the airlines, and we would have annual recurrent training every year. And we never needed to learn anything else. We just needed to cover all of the topics that the FAA wanted us to cover every year to refresh. But the only reason why people enjoyed coming to the trainings was to see the social aspect, seeing each other and sharing their stories in the training venue around what they did and how they were able to solve a problem or make some changes that they wanted to be proud of and share in this forum. Because on the line, they don't have that opportunity to share these stories and feedback. So they looked to the training as a time to come and rehash everything that they wanted to share. And it was the hardest part about that training was to bring people back in, like, okay, come on, back to work, because it was such a social environment. But that's when you learn from other people's stories.
Well, you do, because this is one thing that's interesting, having been in kind of adult education. One of my jokes is I'm in the adult entertainment business. And that always gets that always gets people to kind of raise their eyes, like, you run a porn site? Oh, kind of. No. But the education and learning is different than just knowledge, right? And so much of the time in formal education settings, you're given a bunch of knowledge, but there's actually things in learning we call knowledge, there's skills, and there's competencies. So knowledge is just kind of understanding, right? It's like those FAA checklist things. Here's what the FAA requires you to do. If this scenario happens, here's the things you need to do, right? And so that's knowledge. But knowledge by itself doesn't actually help you. That's just like reading a whole bunch of books or gorging yourself on junk food, but never actually using it, right? And so a lot of people, there's a term in the industry we call shelf help. So people think they're getting self-help, but they're really just putting it on the shelf and they're not actually using it. And so the next thing is the skills of, okay, well, now I understand some things. what are some skills that I can actually use to start applying that knowledge to myself, right? And so there's usually little skills and other things that we can learn. But even with that, it's not until we experience it, until we practice it, until we take time to stop and reflect, that we actually, that knowledge and skills actually become a competency and something that we truly learn. So that's why at the end of the day, like that, as you guys are making dinner in the Airbnb,
Yeah.
and you're kind of talking about what you learned, you're actually reflecting and you're kind of applying it to your life, right? Because that's what you have to think about. Now, like on the airlines, because you've flown much more than I have, but I've been on a lot of airplanes, right? And that safety demonstration at the beginning, why do you have to go through that? Why do we have to listen to it? Because again, from a repetition perspective, that's also a way that we learn. And so that's why when we have, airline incidents, most everybody falls right into line and they know exactly what to do, right? The airline help does, the people on the plane do, because we've practiced it, if you will, over and over again each time that we get on an airplane.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. It's that repetition. What I found was interesting because, I haven't been in a classroom setting, not really a classroom, but I haven't been in-person training in a long time. And there was one of the gentlemen in my class that would literally just sit there, never raised his pen, just absorbed all of this information. I had never seen anyone that could just do that. And I was so impressed that he could just absorb. And so that was my big wanting to know, like, how do you do that? What is the process of just putting it all in your mind? And then there was another girl from Thailand, and she would sit and you could see her thinking around what was said. And it wasn't that she was translating into Thai. She was taking what she was hearing, filtering it in her mind, and then writing it so that she could understand it. Whereas for me, like any really cool word that would pop up, I was like writing the word. But I don't know, like everybody has their own way of learning. And even in TCP, I learned that people draw pictures to remember certain key points. So it's just amazing when you think about what works for you and trying new things even.
Well, and what's interesting, because I'll share share something here I usually don't share with people unless they work with me, because I do have a course on this, but it's interesting because there's two processors in our brain. One's called the phonological, the other is called the orthographic. So this is where I'm probably geeking out.
Yeah, that's a bit geeky.
That's a bit. But what's interesting, because like you said, we don't all learn the same way. And so a lot of people in kind of the educational space, they think about visual, auditory, kinesthetic, VAC, right? That predominantly we all have a different way that we choose to learn. Some people are better when they're actually moving, right? One of my sons, try to strap him in a desk, kid ain't gonna learn a thing. You give him a piece of gum, you let him eat while he's learning, he's going to absorb it more because he's more kinesthetic, right? So if he's moving and doing that. So how do you absorb some of that stuff better? Well, you understand a little bit about your learning style, but the more multi-sensory that you can make your learning experience, the better. And so what happens is, because actually I looked at how the brain processes, and because of those two cycles, you can put them together. And so I created a thing called multi-sensory learning, which is you can, when you see it, say it, hear it, and write it. See it, say it, hear it, and write it. And so again, you'll see those are 4 of the 5 senses that we're actually talking about, right? But when you do that, you're able to remember about 70 to 80% of what it is that you're learning, as opposed to just reading, which is only seeing. You only retain about 10% of it. So the more senses that you can engage when you're actually learning, the more you're actually going to remember it too. So it sounds a little funny, but for example, like if you're reading a book and you say it out loud, or like you would pick up on the word, right?
Mm-hmm.
There'd be a particular word that would
Yeah.
mean something to you. So you're seeing that word or you're hearing that word. Then when you say the word to yourself out loud and you write that word down, now you've closed that loop. You've seen it, you've said it, you've heard it, and you've written it. And so it's kind of a cool little way, because again, the more that you kind of learn how to do this, the more information that you can process quicker. Or like you were saying, the lady from Thailand, the reason that she was doing some of that reflecting
Mm-hmm.
right while she was learning. Oh, I heard that. How does that apply to me? How
Yes.
could I do that in my life? Right. So she's already starting to go through some of that reflection process and figuring out how she can take what she's learning and actually apply it to herself.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I find is what I don't understand about myself is I love taking notes, but I have books of notes everywhere and I don't really spend time looking at them. So I'm wondering, why am I even taking notes?
Mm. Well, do you want an answer for that?
Yes, please.
So it's so here's the thing, and this is especially today, because of technology, everybody wants to take notes on their computer or on
Mhm.
their phone. They want to type it out because they can type it faster. But there is, again, I've got a little book here, I've got a pen I always have with me, because there's a saying that I got told from a mentor a long time ago that was, the faintest pen is better than the best memory.
Mm,
The faintest pen is better than the best memory.
that's a great quote.
So the fact that you've written something down, and this is again what is interesting in the way our brain processes. When you write something down, right, even if it's only one word,
Mhm.
you go back and you look at that one word later, usually what will happen is your subconscious will bring forward all of those things that you experienced when you saw it. And so that's why, taking notes, going back and reviewing your notes is actually a good way to reinforce what you're learning. But even if you never go back
Mhm.
and look at your notebooks, the fact that you wrote it down, right, going back to that multisensory loop I talked about,
Mhm.
the fact that you wrote something down physically, because there's something about the kinesthetic nature of us actually writing with a pen.
Uh-huh. And I'm kinesthetic, so that makes sense that I would want to do something while I'm
Yep.
listening.
And so even if you're just doodling, or
Mhm.
like you said, there's some people in the TCP group we're in, they draw pictures
Mhm.
and they're pretty amazing pictures. But while they're doing that, see, they're activating these other senses. And so that picture to them helps incorporate all of what they've been learning. So
Yeah.
keep taking notes, even if you never look at them,
Yeah.
because taking the notes will help you remember it better.
Okay, I will. I was like, am I wasting my time?
You're not wasting your
Am I
time.
cutting myself off
No.
from learning by taking notes?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Now, if you try to take things verbatim, then yes, you do, because you're so distracted with trying to write it down that you don't learn it. And that's why there's actually been several studies about the effectiveness of like typing notes versus writing notes. And you're much more you remember much more if you write, even if you only write a few words or a few phrases, than you do if you're trying to take notes with a keypad.
Oh,
It's
okay.
scientifically proven too. So keep writing, keep having pens, keep the pen companies in business,
Okay.
because it's actually and it even goes back to some of the child development things
Mhm.
as well, that we're going to probably see, I don't know, 20 or 30 years from now. But when you and I went to school, we had to learn cursive, right?
Right.
You remember that? And we had
Yeah.
there was Danielian cursive that we had to do, and we had to keep writing and doing all this stuff, and penmanship was important.
Yeah.
That's kind of gone from education now because people think, well, we've got computers. We don't need to actually handwrite anymore.
Mhm.
But there's something about the brain development by actually doing that we're probably going to start to see some effects with, this latest generation that never had to go through some of that. There's probably going to be some synapses in their brains that didn't connect that needed to for later on in life. We'll see.
Wow.
All right, that was like geekier than you wanted to go, right? So let's talk about something more fun.
Oh, okay. I have a question for you. Okay. So, because this is like real life, right? So, say like you're married and you have a growth mindset and your spouse has a fixed mindset. What do you do about that?
Not that any of us would have had relationships like that, right?
Right.
Well, and see, it's one of those things that's interesting, right? Is because, if you're somebody who has a growth mindset that wants to grow and wants to learn, it's important to you. It's become a value of yours. It's something that you need, right? So I'm that way. I have to be learning. I have to be teaching. Just that's who I am, right? Other people in my life are not necessarily that way. And so, where the conundrum comes in is when one partner doesn't want to grow and the other one does. So, again, if you've got a good relationship, in theory, right, the one partner doesn't mind either way, right? You both just kind of do what you're going to do, and that's okay, right? But sometimes it does get to the point to where the person who's not growing is like, I don't even recognize you anymore. I don't like you anymore because you've changed. And unfortunately, that happens sometimes, right? I mean, that's happened in some relationships that I've had. And at that point, typically it's just time to move on because we do sometimes outgrow people, which is just a fact of nature. But the other side of it, though, that I always try to look at is I'm going to grow regardless. Now, we can't convince or try to control other people like, Gina, you got to be growing. I'm growing. You got to be growing, girl. Right? That discussion, that ain't going to go over well. Right? But what you find is, again, kind of regardless of what you're doing, if you're growing, other people will see it. And the people who want to grow will look to you as an example. And so that's another one of those where as you change, the world around you will change. Either the people that are around you that you love will say, you know what, I want some more of that. I want me some more of that Gina, right? Yeah. I like her. I like what she's doing. That's interesting. I want to grow as well. And other people will be like, I don't want that Gina anymore. And that's okay too, right? Because either people grow with us or we grow apart.
Right.
And either one is fine. It's okay. We just end up having different life stories, right? And the people that I was friends with in high school, some of the things we still have in common, but other things we don't, right? And so sometimes you've grown on because we both had different life experiences. So we can shoot the bull for 15 or 30 minutes about the glory days and how great it was. And then the conversation kind of falls flat because we're two completely different people.
Right. Yeah. So growing can be both empowering and uplifting, but it can also be difficult when you grow apart, which is something to consider.
Well, it is. I mean, it's again, let's just use a simple example, right? I mean, because this happened to me, it probably, might have happened to you or other people that are listening. I mean, I grew up in a particular area, went to schools, had friends in the schools, and at some point we graduate, right? We have that commencement exercise where we're commencing and moving on to the next part of our life.
Mhm.
At that point, some people decide to go to college. Some people decide not to go to college, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing right or wrong with either path. But obviously, if someone takes a path of going to college and their friend doesn't, you start going on different paths
Mhm.
at that point, right? And I think ultimately that's what does happen. We either grow with or we grow out of certain relationships.
Mhm.
And it's just a cycle of life. There's nothing good or bad about it,
Mhm.
because we each have to follow our own path anyway.
Right. It's our purpose, our meaning, and that we are living.
But it might mean, like you said, sometimes we change and we outgrow our spouse or partner. We
Mhm.
outgrow some of the friends that we had. And then again, each person has to decide, am I going to stay at this level to keep that relationship and not grow myself? Or am I willing to do what it takes, grow myself, let the consequences happen as they may, right?
Mhm.
And I know for a lot of people it is a hard choice to make, because a lot of times we're really attached to these relationships and we don't want to let them go. But
Mhm.
until you let some of those things go, you can't grow and develop.
Yeah, there's growth in the process of letting go as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are there any books or, you know, any groups that you would recommend for growing that you've been in or read?
Which one of those over there, right? Well, that's I literally have a whole library. I left more books with my ex-wife than I have taken. I don't know how many thousands of books I probably read in my life.
Wow.
Um, particular things like that. I mean, the TCP, coaching group that we're in with Jim Fortin is obviously one that does have a huge impact on a lot of people's lives from
Mhm.
a growth perspective, and helps you to see the world completely different.
Yeah.
Um, has there been one book or one thing like that that's really stands out to me? I don't know. I mean, because again, what's interesting is the more you learn and the more you grow, the harder it is sometimes to realize how you know that or why you know certain things.
Mhm.
I remember hearing, it was a speech that this man gave towards the end of his life, and it was a religious leader
Mhm.
that was giving this speech, and I remember, and it wasn't anything about the topic that he was discussing, but what really hit me from his speech was, he said something to this effect. He said, as I'm speaking, you're going to hear me use certain words or phrases that you might have heard other places, the Bible, whatever, right?
Mhm.
But those words have become my words, right? Because as we learn, as we grow, as we develop, a lot of times those things are changing who we are, and those things become a part of us.
Mhm.
And so even though we might have read something somewhere else, it's the accumulation of all of the knowledge and experiences and everything that we've had in life that make us who we are. That's why I'm different, right? Because I've had different experiences, I've learned different things than other people have in a totality. right? There's a lot of things that I've done or experienced that other people have, right? We've both gone through a divorce. We both know what that's like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your divorce was different than my divorce, right?
I'm not divorced yet, but
not technically yet. Okay. All right. Well, it's still coming then. Okay. But
yeah, I can imagine that even from where I am, like how different people's relationships are either easier to separate or not. And yeah.
Yeah, because we all have slightly different experiences, and that's what makes us all unique, right? And I think to me, it's more of, because I'm a big one on, there's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of books you can read. There's a lot of podcasts you can listen to.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff online. And just because you read one book or you do some different things doesn't mean that's where you stop, right? Do the things that resonate with you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I was actually recording a podcast with the guy from Russia for my podcast yesterday. Yeah. And he was talking about some of the books that were, or people maybe that helped him kind of come from this, poverty-stricken boy in a small town in Russia to now being, a professional speaker and doing what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Well, those people and those books spoke to him. And so everybody just has to find what speaks to you. And it's the same thing, for growth, for education. There's a lot of stuff that I had to learn in school that I don't give a damn about. If I never go back, right, and learn any more about particular topics, I'm fine. But there's other things that I can't get enough of, right? How the brain works, the psychology behind it, a lot of things like that, or even just weird stuff like movie trivia and rock and roll history. I love it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
but not everybody does. Not everybody
you play
does.
instruments as well, right?
I do.
Don't you play guitar?
I got a guitar. There's a couple of drums behind me that nobody can see. Yeah.
Right. So there's fun learning too, right?
Oh, there is. And actually it's actually incorporating, again, this is multisensory, incorporating things like music into what you're doing, if that's what tickles your fancy, right? I mean, if it works for you, then try it out and do it. Because I mean, there are actually studies on when you're listening to certain kinds of music while you're learning, you remember it better. There's certain things that music does as you hear it that activates certain parts of your brain that allows you to remember, to learn it, to kind of incorporate it and to remember it better later. Plus, when music is great for this, right? If you remember high school dances, right? There's certain songs that when you hear, even 30, 40 years later, will take you back to a particular experience that you had, because that song is emotionally and subconsciously connected to a particular experience, right? That's the power that multisensory can have with you. It's the same way with smell. It's any of these different things, right? I mean, I walk in and I smell what my grandparents' house smelled like. All of a sudden, right, a lot of those experiences are going to come back in. So these things are happening anyway, but you can choose to use them for your benefit as well. You can use them in your way of learning, and then having fun with what you're doing. Whatever tickles your boat, right? Or tickles your fancy or floats your boat. I get my analogies mixed up sometimes.
Yes. Well, I think is there anything else you want to add to this conversation?
Well, I could keep talking forever.
Well, I always love speaking with you. And I learned so much today around our brains, learning, also being multisensory in our approaches to learning, choosing to have fun and grow. And also that sometimes we outgrow relationships when we choose to learn and grow ourselves. So this really covered a lot. Thank you so much for your time, Jason.
You're welcome. I'm grateful that you had me and that I was able to be here and share, because, you know, I think one of the things that you just hit on there too is the more fun we can have, life can be fun, learning can be fun, growth can be fun if we choose to make it. The nice thing is, the more fun we have, the more we learn as well, right? So just trying to add more fun into our life and everything that we do, which is one of the things I love about you, because you're always like, woo.
Fun. Can you tell fun is one of my values?
I can tell it is.
The top 5 values. Okay, everyone, thanks for listening. Again, I will drop some show notes below so that you can go ahead and start to subscribe to listen to Jason's podcasts and be entertained and educated at the same time. So I'll see you again for another podcast. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks.
Aloha.